I'm Tom Kelly from the holy city of Jarrow and living in Bladen. Just beside, if I look outside my window now, I'll see Bladen Dean. Um, Something about me, tell a little bit about myself. Um, I just thought I'd do that because often at a reading you don't, you just kind of talk about the collection or the short stories and that's the end of it. But I was born in Jarrow and I lived in Jarrow. I've lived in Jarrow most of my life, but now live in Bladen, which is like 20 miles up the river. First, I left school at 15 without any qualifications, and then did a few O levels, and then for the next 20 years or so worked along the river in a variety of jobs. And my first job was not but a couple of hundred yards away from the home of Hope Street in Jarrow, was at the Mercantile Dry Dock, where I worked in a time office. And I remember a friend of mine said, I was always amazed by that, where you worked in a time office, as if you went through the door and you could choose a time. And, 1785 today, I was there, and that was a funny old job, a hard job in lots of ways. And I, I remember I was in the late 60s, and I was working in a transport firm. And I walked along the road leaving work, and I saw these guys digging a hole, and I thought of a rhyme. And I never thought of that before. I'd never thought in any way, like in terms of being a creative writer in any form at all. So it was like Saul on the road to Damascus, where, like, why are you persecuting me? In this case, it wasn't, and I began to write, and I began to write some poetry, but more important, thankfully, that has all disappeared into the mists of terrible poems. Um, and but I did, more importantly, began to read, and I sort of attacked the Jarrow Library on virtually a daily basis, reading in a very indiscriminate sort of way because I was really kind of badly educated, I must admit. So I would go through and read Hemingway and Steinbeck and Stan Barstow and Alan Sillitoe and Kid As Luck, Jack Cobbin, and just read and read and read and read. And I know it's a cliche, but I think it's perfectly true. If you don't read, you can't write. And then in the early 70s, I started working with a musician, David Price, and we began to write songs. And I wrote lots and lots of songs with him. And by the mid 70s, I'd a publishing contract and writing for a band called Lamplight. And it was just the two of them, like a folk duo, and they used to tour the UK. And I'd occasionally go with them wherever that may be. And we'd soon learned which kind of songs went down well, sort of fairly straightforward choruses and storytelling songs. So we wrote lots and lots of them. And in the mid 70s, 75, I got this publishing contract with Alan Price, who you might have heard of through the Animals. So I worked with him a bit, and me and Davey used to still write songs, lots of songs, and we got a deal with Polydor, a major company, and they recorded an album and a single. And the single was released, but the album was never released. It just because the single didn't do well enough, and so I guess that was the end of that. And then later on, 70s, 78, we then wrote. We're still writing songs, and we had an album released, and it was. That's the cover there. It's called Comfort. So you're getting visual aids as well. I mean, it's so sophisticated, it's unbelievable. But this is called Comfort album, and we had a single. That album was released, and the single sort of bubbled under. And I remember being one day listening to Tony Blackburn. You might recall him on the radio, and they were playing the songs. It was called, what the hell's the song called now? I've forgotten the name of the song, but anyway, it got a reasonable sort of plays, and so we got a fair bit of PRS at the time. But also wrote a song for this this person here, Marianne Faithfull, and this song, I can tell no lies, has been on about 20 albums worldwide. All they do is repackage it. So that's the original one, and then there's another one where the song appears on. And I only discovered this when you kind of go to record fairs or something. And there's another one, and it's the same thing. It's the same song, and I'm on the same album as Jesse Coulter, Bob Dylan, Waylon Jennings, and it was Marianne Faithfull's country album. That's how it's now described as. And the guy that was the producer, actually I'd worked with him before. He directed and produced the first Hay that appeared in the West End, and he worked with me on a show that I did with Alan called The Kelly, which was the subject of a BBC 1 and 2 documentary in 1977, 1978, around that period. And I devoted about a year of my life to organising that, and it was a community show. What the Times called it was a folk opera. So that was in 77, 78, and prior to that, which I forgot about, was we did an exhibition called the Gibbet and William Jobling, which was in 1972 at the Bede Gallery in Jarrow, and that exhibition toured the UK. So that the 70s, when I think about it, were taking up lots of things. Also did music for as a program on the night time with Cliff Mitchell more. I can't remember. Tonight it might have been called. I can't remember what it was called now. And we wrote a song for that, for one of those things. We did a show for TV called The Hookie Mat, and we provided the songs. Those are the things that happened. There was lots of things that didn't happen. I wrote with a lad called Ron Smith. He got a deal with he won a BBC competition, and the company, Alan's company, his brother who worked there, John, who worked for him at the time, said, "Well, this lad lives in Jarrow. Can you go and see him? He's written this thing." And I remember listening on his cassette, and it was just like listening to a Yes album with no lyrics. And I had to come up with an idea. So I came up with an idea, Ragnarok, the Twilight of the Gods, and they spent an absolute fortune on it. They had the London Welsh Choir on it. They had the guy from ELO who produced it, and it did absolutely nothing. And then I did another show, and it was about Hughie Gallagher, who played for Newcastle in the 30s, and I got interest from another guy called Alex Harvey. He had a band called the Sensational Alex Harvey Band. So the booked time in the studio, I went down to London, and then I was dragged out to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning, and Davey says, "It's Alex on the phone. He's pulling out because he won't do it now." So at 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm standing with my underpants on the phone to Alex Harvey, and he says, "I cannot do it. The man with the medallion won't let me do it." He'd left the Sabs, he'd left Sensational Alex Harvey Band, and his new manager wouldn't let him do these demos. So, there was as many things that didn't happen as did happen. So that was the 70s, really. So probably did lots of other things as well, which I can't recall. And then the 80s came along, and I got made redundant from the firm I was working for at the time, and I decided to do a degree. So I went to Newcastle Poly as was and did a degree. And then during the 80s, I got 3 Ds. I got the degree, the dole, and my daughter, all in that 1 year. But also was employed by I became a part-time lecturer initially for South Tyneside College, and I worked there for 25 years as a lecturer. Initially in all sorts of things, call it communication studies and the like. Mike Doll, who's on there now, knows full well what it was like, corkers and burners. I remember having the corkers and burners 4:30 till 5:30 on a Monday night, and if you can teach that at 4:30 to 5:30, and you've had they've had half a dozen pints in the county and South Shields on the lunchtime, you can do most things. Doing this is has to be said, a pleasure. But so I worked there, and eventually for a number of years I did performing arts, and I would write lots of shows with a variety of people to to suit the audience, the audience we have, not the audience, the company, the students, because no play or no musical is written for 13 girls and 2 boys, so you had to find yourself writing for that particular number of people. So I did that, and all the time I was writing all the time. During that period, perhaps the most successful thing I did was a thing called I Left My Heart in Roker Park, because I'm a Sunderland supporter for my sins. And but now they're picking up, they're going to do all right, the lads. And it was eventually, that was Ray Spencer who performed it, and we did that. It's been produced 4 times. We had Ray did it twice, and then we had the late Davy Whittaker, and then the last time we had was Paul Dunn, all of whom were terrific in their different ways. And I'd like to think that make me return when we've won go into the championship next year, away from what is now Division 3. Makes you wonder. So. And then from, let's say, 97, 98, that's where I'm up to, roughly. I'm still writing plays and plays and musicals. So I wrote the first musical with John Miles was in 98. We did a musical adaptation of Robert Westall's novel, The Machine Gunners, which went to Edinburgh Festival for a month. And then I wrote Dan Day, because Dan Day was a favourite of mine as a child. And then we did Tom and Catherine, about the Cooksons. Tom and Catherine. And at that point, I think I probably knew everything about Catherine Cookson, because people who are Catherine Cookson fans, if you get anything wrong, they'll at least lynch you. So I went to a talk by, I've forgotten the guy's name, but he'd written a book on Catherine. And he told a little anecdote at the end, and I think this sums Catherine's nature perfectly. She'd died, and that employed a nurse to look after Tom. And they said, Tom, Mr. Cookson, you'll have to have your hair cut. He says, oh, yes. She says, by the way, who used to cut your hair? He said, oh, the gardener. The gardener? Yes, because Catherine said, if you can cut grass, you can cut hair. It just kind of sums her up to my mind. She was a very caring, very generous sort of woman, but also very controlling in a sense, yes. So lots and lots of things, lots of shows, most of them at the Customs House. And then from the early 2000s, have been published the last 12 years by Sheila Wakefield of Red Squirrel Press. Dreamers in the Cold Climate was the first collection I've had, and now 9 collections, and a short story pamphlet, and a play, and Behind the Wall, which I'm going to read to you tonight. This small patch, which is I'm going to read you some poems from now. Was that introduction all right? Do I just get a nod? That's fine. Yes, that's fine. Okay, I'll just read. I'll have a little drink now. I'll have a bottle when I finish, a bottle of beer when I finish. Okay, so what I'm trying to do with this small patch, if I can just show you the collection. Maybe I can see that. Yep, is that okay? And Jerry Cambridge, who does the design, is an absolute marvel. And I think Sheila said this initially, it'll look better when you see it, when you have it in your hands. And I think that's perfectly true. It's because perhaps you can't see, but it's the writing is tiny, it's quite small. But I really think it's a fantastic design. Well done, Jerry. And what I've tried to do here is to capture my hometown in Jarrow in as many ways as possible, in a variety of forms, I should say, rhymed and free verse, interviews, recorded speeches and lyrics, because I wanted to make the collection as inclusive and as honest as possible. That might sound like cliche, but that's really what I intended to do. Right, I mentioned Jobling before. I'm not going to give you a great deal of detail about William Jobling, just very summary, a little summary, because if I start talking about Jobling, I'll go on forever. I'll give you shoe size. Um, William Jobling was a Jarrow pitman who in 1832, with Nicholas Fairless, attacked a magistrate by the name of Nicholas Fairless. The main perpetrator was a man called Ralph Armstrong. Jobling was there. Fairless died 10 days after the attack. And I'm not defending what he did. What I'm more concerned about is what the authorities of the day did. So Lord Melbourne, who was the Home Secretary, was determined to wipe out, to diminish the power of the growing unions. And this is a time really of uncertainty. It's the beginning of the 19th century, a lot of uncertainty in terms of people wanting some power. You had to say the birth of the unions, Tommy Hedburn's union in 1831. You had the swing riots prior to that. You had Peterloo in 1816. So there was that time of insurrection, and they were determined to knock it down. So Jobling was caught on South Shields Sand. He was taken to Durham. He was tried. He was found guilty. He was hung. His clothes were removed. He was covered in pitch, and he was taken by 100 hussars from Durham to Jarrow Slacks, as they say, or Jarrow Slake, if you want to be posh, placed on a gibbet 21 foot high, and in order to show the power of authority. That really essentially was it. He was placed up there for 3 weeks. His friends, risking 7 years transportation, came out, stole the body. Where the body is, it's uncertain. So I'm imagining now. If you can imagine for a second, I am William Jobling. I'm in a cell prior to being hung the night before. So this is Jobling's prayer. Father, art you in heaven, praying for all our souls. I'm a young lad bought and sold in the pit from just 7. Just frozen water, grab coal, eager watching the lamp slick, waiting for a blinding kick to be left in that black hole. And I lived with death most days, nights the same. Me brother died, he hung on to life and cried, in Jarrow's pit where I'll pray. And I know I'll meet me end on a rope, not a fall or gas. And it's not a lot to ask, can you be God and a friend? From the 1850s in Jarrow, there was a population explosion. And because in 1852, Charles Palmer and his brother George established Palmer Shipyard. And Palmer advertised an island for workers. And my side, the Kelly side of the family from Tipperary, and the Cummiskey side, which is my mum's side of the family, came from Galway. And this yet again, this is Thomas Cummiskey, who's my great grandfather. I picture him, I visualize him in Jarrow at the time. So it's Thomas Cummiskey. I'm with me great grandfather, Thomas Cummiskey, 1866, 1944, looking for work and lodgings in Jarrow. He's uncertain on these paved paths, joining men spitting down Elston Street to Palmer Shipyard, wearing sturdy boots cobbled by his father the day he left Galway. Working with the riveters, noise as hell. The fields of Clumbar he would love to cup in his hands, hold silence he dreams of carrying. Geordie voices confuse, he deals and nods and smiles, dragging riveters' hammers on decks of maroon boats. Today he wants to be home. There's a hole where family should be. The foreman knows an Irish face when he sees one, calls him Paddy. Perhaps the most important or most memorable thing that's happened in Jarrow is the Jarrow Crusade of October 1936, when 200 men from Jarrow marched the 300 miles to London to tell the government of the plight of the town. Included among those men was me Uncle Johnny, that was me dad's brother. Uncle Johnny is my screensaver, walking down Edgware Road, chiselled cheeks, no smile. You really told a joke. Now I see him laughing, gums exposed like salmon. Auntie Winnie disappears, free of having to care for her poor Johnny. Vinegar clout clasped to his forehead, cup of cold milky tea in a skeletal hand. I see you every day, the dutiful son you never had, watching you walking into immortality. In the early 70s, I interviewed a lot of men that walked, and that were on the Jarrow Crusade. And one of them that I interviewed was a man called Joe Simons, who was a Jarrow councillor during the 1930s and eventually became an MP for Whitehaven. And I guess I was only, I don't know, in the early 20s. So Joe Simons eating deprivation. You talked as if giving a speech, clear as a bell, loud. I was young, intimidated, didn't feel your warmth, lost in a lifetime of meetings in church halls and parliament. It was not love until you spoke of Jarrow in the 1930s, deprivation you wished you could have eaten. And I'm quite proud to say that I nominated Joe for a blue plaque, which he just recently received, and it's on Jarrow Town Hall. There's a lot of photographs of the Jarrow Crusade. I'd like you to know that the images of the Jarrow Crusade are now owned by the Getty Foundation. So those that have will continue to have. But there's lots of photographs of men, quite obviously. But there's one kind of a woman standing there, and yet again I just sort of tried to key into her head. The woman left. You've seen her, blotch face and sepia print photograph, children clinging to a penny, hands rough as pumice stone. Tears hold their own in the corner of her eyes, wishing they could be used in the pawn shop. Looking at the marchers, holding back speaking, everyone lost in euphoria. She wants to survive. Perhaps the most famous person involved with the march was Ellen Wilkinson, and she was MP for Jarrow 1933 to 1947. Prior to that, she'd been MP in Middlesbrough, but she was also a Minister of Education in Clem Attlee's government. And this is the speech that she made at Hyde Park when the marchers arrived in London. And she said, "We shall not be silent. Men are thrown on slag heaps as if the stuff that is thrown out off the furnaces. They will not be treated like slag, like things you can throw away. There's not a wheel turning or a chimney smoking at Jarrow. When you think of slums, think of Jarrow. It has been suggested that Jarrow has been the centre of subversive movement against the government. It may therefore interest you to know that of the total number of marchers, 62% are old army men who served in the war. I must praise the women of the marchers who have been forced to apply to the Public Assistance Committee in absence of their husbands. We have unacceptable levels of TB, rickets, and infant mortality. We say these things shall not be. At least we shall not stand silent and let it be." Incidentally, the child mortality rate was 13% in Jarrow. Today, it is less than half of 1%. And he also had TB and rickets, as Ellen Wilkinson says. As a child, the family would always talk about, well, your Auntie Kath had to go to the place and your Auntie Amelie had to go to the place. I used to think it was a town. I didn't realise that what they were saying was they had to leave Jarrow and go to place, because once they were 13 and left school, there was no jobs for them. So I've got relations in the Midlands and that area who my father's sisters. So this poem's for me Auntie Mealy, Kath, Mary and Margaret. It's called Place. My dad's sisters went to place, leaving Jarrow in the 30s, crying into any bugger's arms. Here's a photograph of their family, placed in box rooms, held close to uniforms and grand houses, kept them bloody warm. Now all dead, there they are, across the room from me. See them, bairns of 13. I'll read you a couple of stories now, and these are from Behind the Wall, which again is published by the Red Squirrel Press. And as soon as you come offline, if you just go on to Red Squirrel Press, and the collection, the small patch, will pop up and Behind the Wall, so you'll be able to purchase them quite easily. Right. I told you about how I used to write for Lamplight, and one of the songs we wrote was called Friends. It was a kind of catalogue of famous or well-known Geordie people like Coffee Johnny, and one of them was a man called Tommy on the Bridge. And I'm just trying to think of the name of the tune. If you should see some friends of mine, ask them round to share some time with you, and maybe they'll be friendly to you. So that's Friends anyway. You got a song, you got a joke. What more could you want? So this is a story, and it's called Tommy, the City and Me. And I imagined I was in the bridge one night, and I just imagined the bridge pub, and I just imagined Tommy on the bridge walking into Newcastle today, and what he would make of it. And so Tommy comes to life, as it were. So it's Tommy, the City and Me. Walking out of the flickering shadows of the high-level bridge, I head to the bridge bar, and tappy-lappy down the cobbles to the quayside, and face the new pubs and clubs with taxis devouring customers at the beginning of the month. Ships are missing. The smell of the past is gone. It's Newcastle now, and the Millennium Bridge, a barred half-moon, drapes the river. Looking back at the Tyne Bridge, a bunch of Geordie lasses scream at the sky. I see him near the Guildhall, a bag of rags, blind, empty-eyed, and so foul-mouthed it's painful. Tommy on the bridge, hitting the present. He scrounges tabs from the young lasses before they throw him out the Crown Passada, the smell of dry piss too much for the early doors 2-pint drinkers. Stag night lads knock Tommy's hat and it slops on the ground as he throws his stick at them, and they coy each other, cling together, throwing coins he gathers in his buckled hands. I leave him, turn over the money, trying to make sense of it. Outside the Baltic, sun glazes the metal tables, and Tommy makes me a shadow, stand in front of me, smelling of shit and beer. Ask who he is. He spits at me, knowing only too well my game. You'll see us for a bit, but I'm always here. Don't forget that, mister. Put that in your story. He kicks my chair, and it rattles as if I'm in a cage. In the 1880s, Tommy Ferrens would stand on the swing bridge, straddling the line between Gateshead and Newcastle to avoid being arrested. He was at it again, not in one place or another. The young manager at the Baltic bar asks him to leave. Tommy walks away with all the pride he can muster, farting so loud the entire bar laughs. I followed him to the Millennium Bridge, and then looked upstream at those wonderful bridges, and felt a heart-bursting pride. Sentimentality rose like sap, and I began to cry and stood transfixed. I held the moment as I retraced my past, the Downbeat Club, Club of Go-Go with the Animals, Mayfair and Cavendish. The music was so loud in my head I had to sit in the literary and philosophical library and drown in whispers as bass lines began to fade and whining guitars became background music. I walk into the Mining Institute and the past erupts. Blood seeps from books, miners' amputated legs, and tangle with their widows round and round the corridors, and I have to leave as Stevenson hands me a lamp and shows me the way out. I'm bedazzled by light at the bottom of Westgate Road. I head to Dobson Central Station, excited to fade as a child, and just stop myself from getting onto the metro to the end of the line. Tommy is behind me. I smell him before I see him. I'm being stalked by a dead blind man. Tommy died in 1907, collapsing in snow at Gateshead. Here I am, At Central Station to my left, dressed in muffled announcements, diving through traffic, heading towards Stowell Street, Chinatown, down the back lane, passing the Morden Tower, buried in poetry in the arse end of restaurants. His heavy breathing's behind me as I fly out of the cobbled lane and past the Irish Centre in St James's Park, bending to me. I try to lose him, but he is wise to me every move, and with the Haymarket bus station and Newcastle University before me, his sickly breath is fresh and strong on me neck. I run down Northumberland Street and head to Shieldfield and Byker. He's running me out of town. I stand and eye the bedraggled sky on Byker Bridge, breathing sharp as a razor. I know the past has me. Tommy's harsh voice ringing in me head. The past not deed. Put that in your story, mister. As a young lad, I joined Jarrow-born Athletic Club when I was 13, and athletics was a huge part of my life. And recently there's a history of Jarrow-born Athletic Club being publicised, being pushed, just being published is the word I was looking for. And there I am, I don't know if you'd see that, and running an ATT race. There you are, so there you are. At the Tyneside track lead, as it was called then. It's now the International Stadium. So this is just the opening of this, and it's not the character in it isn't me, but the training sessions probably are. It's called the new tracksuit. Breathing's harsh, lungs burn. Grass at the side of the track, inviting. He's turning white with the effort of this training session. Arms swing across his chest as he clings to the bend of the running track, swaying washed-out white lines. This is the last run of the night. Maintain the pace, he says to himself, crossing the spot where his tracksuit lies. Every run is in the same time. His head hangs between shaking legs as he gulps the air, drags off his vest, struggles into the tracksuit, tripping every time he tries to put his feet into the bottoms. He jogs haltingly home, drained. The next day at work, his calf muscles are stiff. He had given himself a hard workout, and that is what he wanted. It had to hurt. Pain leads to victory is one of his mantras. Now the best middle distance runner in the athletics club, he did not want to be an all-around, hated that idea. Pain proved he would make it. He trained alone. No one in the club was serious as Mickey. They would say, "Steer clear of Mickey." Then under their breath, "He'll kill himself." "All right, son." Mickey's father was used to long pauses. Today was no exception. A few years ago, I wrote, I did the introduction, the narration rather, for a short film called Wildflower, which was about Aileen O'Shaughnessy. Aileen O'Shaughnessy was born in South Shields in 1905. She went to local school, Westfield School, then went to Sunderland High School, and then went to Oxford in the 1930s when women were chaperoned. She goes to a Parliament Hill cocktail party. She meets a man called Richard Blair, and they get married. And so we did this film called Wildflower, as I say, and we did had an event in Jarrow Library, and the Orwell Society came to that event. Richard Blair and Quentin Klopp. Richard Blair, of course, was George Orwell's adopted son, and Quentin Klopp went to fought in Catalonia with George Orwell. And she's buried in Jesmond Cemetery. She died on the operating theatre in Newcastle in 1945, sadly. And Richard had never been to the graveside before, and he was going to read something from a book by a guy called Jones, and he forgot the book. And the day before, when I read the poem, Quentin had said to me, "Tom, will you give us a copy of that poem?" So I emailed the poem to him that night, and at the graveside he said, "I've forgotten the book," and Quentin said, "Well, I've got Tom's poem." So Richard Blair, the son of George Orwell, read this poem at his mother's graveside, and I'm proud of that. So it's you, Aileen Blair, Neo O'Shaughnessy, 1905-1945. I'm thinking of you. Your husband we know, chiselled in our language, You're a footnote, acknowledging animal form, no longer reprised. I see you as a bairn in South Shields, running into your father's arms on King Street, down to the customs house, your dad king, counting all his money, tax that wasn't his. I hear you squealing, they're just like black clocks at men scrabbling into the yards, your posh Geordie voice moulded by your father's Irish lilt and mother's broad Norfolk, skipping down the law, flicking your wooden top as if it were the world. Western School, slate and chalk, learning by rote, 6 sevens are 42, 7 sevens are 49, the mantra running wild on the schoolyard walls. Sunderland High School, there you are on the board, 1923, Eileen O'Shaughnessy. You're dying alone, Eric in Paris. You write to him, it fills this page with my tears. I wring them into a bowl, I see your stillness. You met at a Parliament Hill cocktail party. Were you at ease? Did you cling to the wall? Was Eric all smiles and stories? Men fell in love with you. Your easy way, Irishness that captivated them. He was awkward, gangly. You took over the room. Is that how it was? We have your letters to friends, your wit, and I see you married, living on eggs. I've met your son. I see you in the garden, playing with him before you left. I read your death certificates in the easy cause of death. I am at your grave. It is autumn and leaves spread themselves like a brocade brooch I imagine you wearing as you raise your eyes to the blue-grey. I see you now in a Spanish restaurant. You're laughing to heaven, drinking local rough red wine and spilling it on the wooden table. Eric shot in the neck. You nurse him. You're proofreading his work, script editor, cook, bottle washer, wife, and the rest. You bore it with laughter that split the sky. I know you now. I see you now. I hear you now. Feel you beside me. They know Eric. May they know you. 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 Um, um, I'll, well, I think that's sort of 45 minutes so far. So I'll finish off with some lyrics. We did a show called Men of the Tyne in 2011, which we toured art centres with, and we did really well with it, yes. And we did an album, and when you buy a copy of this small patch, you'll get a freebie copy of the DVD. So you get all sorts on this. So it's I interviewed guys that worked on the river from 1950s to 1980s. And every trade that you spoke to, they were always the ones that made the difference. This one's called If It Wasn't For Me, There'd Be No Ships. I was a riveter. I worked hard, laying us to tankers in every tyne yard. Loved a can of tea and brazier toast. I do it now, but I'm deaf as a post. I was a rigger, swans to middle docks. Many's the time I'd work round the clock. And they say I was magic with rope and twine. Come off the door to work on overtime. If it wasn't for me, there'd be no ships on the Tyne. If it wasn't for me, there'd be no ships on the Tyne. True, I'm telling you. If it wasn't for me, there'd be no ships on the Tyne. I'm a welder. God in a welding mask. I could do any job that the foreman asked. And we were kings of all the trades, and we deserved the money that we got paid. I'm a shipwright. I work in wood and steel. When I launch a ship, I lay the next ship's keel. And every time on launch day, we feel fine as we hammer out the blocks to send her into the Tyne. If it wasn't for me, there'd be no ships on the Tyne. If it wasn't for me, there'd be no ships on the Tyne. It's true, I'm telling you. If it wasn't for me, there'd be no ships on the Tyne. Right, so I'll finish off with this one poem called Jodie. And lots of my mates, when the shipyards north of the Tyne closed about in the mid-90s, south of the Tyne in the mid-80s. And they found themselves, some of them working all over the world. Marty, a friend of mine, and I said, where you been? He said, I've just been off New York. I says, all right, did you see much there? He says, no. He says, arrived in JFK, they picked us up, went on a boat 3 miles out in the water. I was there for 2 weeks on this little boat, brought us back. He said, so bugger all, so note. And that was, they worked on the rigs, they worked in Nigeria, they worked all over the world. Tradesmen from the time worked all over the world at that time. You know the expression, wherever you go, you're sure to find a Geordie. Well, thank you very much. You've been a lovely audience. It's been nice looking at some of you. So this is your last one of the night. So enjoy your cup of coffee or a glass of wine or your beer after this. And it's nice that you haven't got to drive home, isn't it? There's always positives. Geordie's on a train, Newcastle King's Cross, bag of dirty clothes, head battered with loss. Wife's on the rantan and hitting the drink. It could be another man, he starts to think. He aims to forget. Cans evaporate and empties clatter like sheep at a gate. Geordie fugitive, chasing the work. Things don't change. It's a never-ending search. When Durham gloriously appears, her text drones out, we are in arrears. He's been here before. Stevenage or Slough, shitty B&Bs, landladies are calm. The bairns forget him. He's sad and alone. He tells his tale and tries not to mourn. Geordie fugitive, chasing the work. Things don't change. It's a never-ending search. He dreams he's always on this train. When he wakes with a shock, time and again, the baby's asleep and the boy snores. We all get lost in the train's gentle roar. Geordie wants to cry as he weaves his name, the lip of his can on the window pane. Geordie fugitive, chasing the wake. Things do change. It's a never-ending search. He's on a journey, running out of steam, looking for answers, believing in dreams. A better life, a few pints and time to kill. A drunk screams, the last of his beer spills. Defeat's in the air and runs through every day, as washed out dream, pass the time's life away. Geordie fugitive, chasing the work. Things don't change. It's a never-ending search. Thank you very much.